Shalom. You earned it. You protected it. You worked longer than the generation before you, and still, it did not remain. What you built dissolves where you expected it to endure. You are not the first to notice this, and you will not be the last. There is a pattern here, one that most people see but never recognize. They watch it happen to their neighbors, their colleagues, their own families. They witness the same sequence repeat across decades, across centuries, yet they continue to believe the next time will be different. You have seen this yourself. A family builds something substantial, real estate holdings, a business that thrives, investment portfolios that grow year after year. The founder works 70-hour weeks, sacrifices vacations, delays retirement. They accumulate assets worth millions, sometimes tens of millions. Their children grow up comfortable, educated, provided for. Then the founder dies. Within a generation, maybe two, the wealth has vanished, not stolen, not lost to market crashes or natural disasters. It simply disperses, like water poured onto sand. The children sell the business to strangers. The real estate gets divided and sold off piece by piece. The investment accounts get liquidated to fund lifestyles that generate no new wealth. By the time the grandchildren reach adulthood, they are starting over, just as their great-grandparents once did. This is not an accident. This is not bad luck. This is not the result of changing economic conditions or generational moral decline. This is the natural consequence of how most people understand wealth itself. You see wealthy families and you notice the ones that persist, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, old European nobility whose fortunes span centuries. You assume they have some secret, some special knowledge or connections unavailable to others. You assume they are simply better at making money, or luckier, or more ruthless. But this misses the fundamental difference. These families do not just make wealth, they structure wealth. They do not just earn assets. They create systems that transcend the individuals who built them. Most people confuse wealth with money. They confuse assets with inheritance. They believe that passing wealth to the next generation means transferring ownership of accounts and properties. They think inheritance is about distributing possessions after death. So they work harder. They save more aggressively. They buy life insurance policies and set up trust funds. They hire estate planning attorneys and tax specialists. They create detailed wills specifying exactly which child gets which asset. And they watch their wealth evaporate anyway. The pattern is always the same. The builder accumulates assets through discipline, sacrifice, and focused effort. They delay gratification, work long hours, take calculated risks. They develop the habits and mindset necessary to create wealth from nothing. Their children grow up observing this process, but not participating in it. They see the results of their parents' work, but not the daily choices that produced those results. They inherit money, but not the systems that generated it. They receive assets, but not the authority structures that sustain them. So the children make different choices, not necessarily bad choices, but different ones. They pursue careers based on interest rather than financial necessity. They spend money more freely because it has always been available. They take risks their parents never would have taken, because they have a safety net their parents built but never had themselves. This is not moral failure. This is not laziness or ingratitude. This is the natural result of inheriting resources without inheriting the conditions that created those resources. Wealth requires maintenance. Not just financial management, but structural maintenance. The systems that generate wealth must be preserved and strengthened across time. The habits that build wealth must be transmitted and reinforced. The authority patterns that protect wealth must survive the death of their creator. But most people do not build these deeper structures. They build personal wealth, not family wealth. They create assets tied to their own knowledge, relationships, and decisions. When they die, the assets remain, but the foundation crumbles. Consider how most successful entrepreneurs operate. They build businesses around their own expertise and personality. Their employees follow them, not the company. Their customers trust them personally, not the brand. Their suppliers offer favorable terms because of long-standing personal relationships. When such an entrepreneur dies, what exactly gets inherited? The children receive ownership of a business, but the business was really just an extension of one person. The relationships, the institutional knowledge, the decision-making frameworks, the risk management systems, all of these were embedded in an individual who no longer exists. So the children face an impossible choice. They can try to run a business they do not understand, making decisions based on information they do not possess, maintaining relationships they did not build. Or they can sell the business to someone who does understand it, converting it into cash that can be more easily divided and managed. Most choose to sell. They are not stupid or lazy. They are simply being rational. But this converts productive assets into consumable assets. A business that generated ongoing income becomes a bank account that only shrinks. Wealth that was growing becomes wealth that is diminishing. This same pattern occurs with real estate, investment portfolios, intellectual property, and every other form of asset. When wealth is built around an individual, it dies with that individual. What gets passed on is not wealth itself, but the remnants of wealth. The families that maintain wealth across generations understand this distinction. They do not build personal empires. They build institutional structures that can function independently of any single person. They create systems of authority that transcend individual knowledge or charisma. Look at how old banking families operate. The Rothschild network was not built around one brilliant financier, but around a family structure that could coordinate activities across multiple countries and generations. Each brother established operations in a different European capital, but they all followed the same principles and maintained constant communication. When one brother died, his role could be filled by sons or cousins who had been trained from childhood to understand the family's methods. The relationships with governments and other banks belonged to the family name, not to individuals. The decision-making processes were documented and transferable. The wealth generation systems could continue operating regardless of personnel changes. This is why traditional aristocracy developed such elaborate rules around inheritance and authority. Primogeniture was not just about keeping estates intact. It was about ensuring that someone was always fully responsible for the family's long-term interests. Titles and lands came with specific obligations and constraints that limited how they could be used. These structures often seem antiquated or unfair from a modern perspective. Why should the eldest son inherit everything while younger siblings get nothing? Why should inherited wealth come with so many restrictions about how it can be spent or invested? But these constraints served a function. They prevented inherited wealth from being treated as personal property to be consumed at will. They maintained the distinction between stewardship and ownership. They ensured that each generation understood their role as temporary custodians of assets that belonged to the family as an ongoing institution. Most modern wealth creation ignores these principles entirely. People build personal fortunes and then try to pass them on as personal inheritances. They assume that financial success will automatically translate into generational wealth. They confuse temporary prosperity with permanent elevation. So they create estate plans designed to minimize taxes and maximize distributions to heirs. They divide assets equally among children to avoid accusations of favoritism. They structure inheritances to provide maximum flexibility and minimum constraints. They prioritize fairness over functionality, and their wealth disperses exactly as physics would predict. Energy spreads from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. Resources flow from focused applications to diffuse consumption. Wealth moves from institutional structures to individual accounts where it can be more easily spent. The children receive equal shares, so no one person has enough concentrated wealth to maintain the systems that generated it. The assets come with minimal restrictions, so there is no structural pressure to preserve or grow them. The inheritance is designed for consumption rather than continuation. Even when families attempt to create more sophisticated structures, they often misunderstand what they are trying to accomplish. They establish family foundations or trust funds, but they design these as wealth distribution mechanisms rather than wealth generation systems. A trust fund that provides quarterly distributions to beneficiaries is not building family wealth, it is liquidating family wealth on an installment plan. A family foundation that grants money to outside charities is not strengthening family institutions, it is transferring family resources to external organizations. These structures may provide tax advantages or public relations benefits, but they do not solve the fundamental problem of wealth continuity. They may slow the process of asset dissipation, but they do not reverse it. They manage decline rather than building permanence. Families that successfully maintain wealth across generations understand that inheritance is not primarily about transferring assets, it is about transferring authority. The question is not how much each child should receive, but which child should receive responsibility for the family's long-term interests. This requires identifying and developing heirs who have both the ability and commitment to serve as stewards rather than beneficiaries. It means creating structures where authority and responsibility are linked, where those who control family assets are accountable for preserving and growing them. It means building businesses and investments that can function as family institutions rather than personal possessions. It means developing decision-making processes that can survive transitions in leadership. It means creating incentive systems that reward long-term thinking over short-term consumption. Most importantly, it means recognizing that wealth preservation requires sacrifice from each generation, not the sacrifice of living in poverty or denying yourself basic comforts, but the sacrifice of treating family assets as family assets rather than personal property. This is why wealth preservation feels unnatural to most people. It conflicts with modern ideas about individual autonomy and equality. It requires accepting constraints on how money can be used. It demands prioritizing collective long-term interests over individual short-term preferences. It means that not every family member can receive an equal share of assets. It means that some family members must accept supporting roles, while others take leadership positions. It means that current generations must limit their consumption to ensure resources remain available for future generations. These sacrifices feel unnecessary when you are the generation that built the wealth. You earned this money through your own efforts. Why should you not be free to distribute it however you choose? Your children are all equally deserving. Why should one receive more than others? You have worked hard your entire life. Why should you not enjoy the fruits of your labor? But wealth preservation is not about what feels fair or natural in the moment. It is about creating conditions that allow resources to compound across time rather than being consumed in each generation. The families you observe maintaining wealth across centuries did not achieve this by accident. They developed institutional frameworks that made wealth preservation more likely than wealth dissipation. They created systems where the default outcome was continuity rather than dispersion. They understood that money without structure is just temporary abundance. Assets without authority are just deferred consumption. Inheritance without institution is just delayed liquidation. This is why most families touch wealth briefly but do not maintain it. They create assets but not systems. They build personal fortunes but not generational institutions. They accumulate money but not the frameworks necessary to preserve and grow that money across time. They mistake the symptom for the disease. They assume that wealth disappears because children are spoiled or lazy or financially irresponsible. They believe that better financial education or stricter parenting would solve the problem. They think that moral character determines financial outcomes. But character is not the primary factor. Structure is the primary factor. Good people operating within bad systems will produce predictable results regardless of their intentions or values. Wealth will disperse not because of moral failure, but because of structural inevitability. You can see this pattern in your own observations. Families where children are raised with strong work ethics and conservative values still lose wealth across generations if they lack institutional frameworks. Families where children are spoiled and entitled sometimes maintain wealth if they inherit effective systems. The children do not determine the outcome. The containers determine the outcome. And yet, even if you understand this principle, even if you build perfect containers, even if you train ideal heirs, transfer is still not guaranteed. The timing pattern cannot be separated from the structure pattern. One without the other is just elaborate preparation for the same predictable failure. And yet, even when everything is prepared, release is not guaranteed. If this brought clarity, subscribe, not for motivation, but for understanding.